Mr. Major General Gronski,
Yes.
Thank you for an opportunity to talk with you about the leadership issues. And my first question would be, what should be the main values of the military leaders?
The main values of a military leader, that's a good question, because I do think values are extremely important. And in the American Army, we actually have 7 Army values, and they are loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, integrity, and personal courage. And those are the 7 Army values. I think the most important of those values is integrity. Integrity is everything. When an officer gives their word, people have to believe that that officer is going to follow through on their word, and they have to be honest, they have to display integrity. The other value that I think is extremely important of those is personal courage. An officer has to have physical courage, of course, but also moral courage. And that means an officer has to be willing to not only set standards, but enforce those standards and adhere to those standards themselves. Standards are extremely important in the military.
What are the biggest challenges to educate military leaders?
The biggest challenges?
Challenges, yes, because not everyone can become a real leader.
Well, I think everyone could learn how to become a better leader. Everyone may not become a great leader like, for example, a Colin Powell, who is a famous general in the American Army. But I believe everybody could improve their leadership ability with the appropriate training. It's more so than just the education when you're in a formal training situation, like in a military academy. You have to continue to train once you leave that schoolhouse. And the way you could train once you leave the schoolhouse is by finding mentors in your life, finding somebody that you look up to, finding somebody who you could gain advice from, and then use the advice that you are given.
And what does it mean to be a leader, military leader in a peacetime and during the war?
I think it's, personally, I think it's very similar. I think if you're going to be successful in wartime, it all starts with how you lead in peacetime. I think you set the conditions to be successful in war by the way you lead when you're in a peacetime environment. One thing I learned, I commanded a brigade in Ramadi, Iraq in 2005 and 2006. And I had 5,000 soldiers and Marines under my command. However, when you're fighting an insurgency, you don't fight as a 5,000 soldier unit. You really conduct most of your operations at the platoon level, which is around 40 soldiers. And I found it was very important that junior leaders, lieutenants and sergeants, felt comfortable displaying initiative and making decisions. Of course, with the proper guidance from their senior leaders. So when I came back from that experience, and I took command of the 28th Infantry Division in the Pennsylvania Army National Guard, I made a point to try to create an environment where leaders during the peacetime and training mode that we were in felt comfortable displaying initiative and making decisions in peacetime, because I believe if you don't create an environment where your soldiers feel comfortable displaying initiative in peacetime, they're not going to feel comfortable displaying initiative in wartime. And having that ability to display initiative is critical to achieving the mission and winning.
I would like to ask you about the importance of the cultural differences, because today we talk about the different leaders, different values.
Yeah.
So what does it mean to be a leader in the West or in the East, in a democracy or in autocracy, talking about the military field?
Yeah, well, let me set the difference between NATO countries, which of course Lithuania is one of, I believe, our most loyal NATO allies. I just love the fact that Lithuania is really embraces the NATO values that America and all of our allies share versus the Russian values. And I think it really comes down to a few things. First of all, it's respect for life, respect for human life. I think NATO allies have a deep respect for human life, and that means how they treat non-combatants during a wartime environment, how they treat civilians on the battlefield, and how the leaders in our NATO countries treat their soldiers versus Russia. I think based on the experience in Ukraine, we've seen that Russia is very brutal. Russia has created atrocities against civilians in Ukraine. Russia has raped women. They've executed civilians with their hands tied behind their back. And then we've seen that the Russian leaders do not treat the Russian soldiers very well at all. They treat them, I like to say, as cannon fodder. They have no respect for the people that they lead. So I think there's some distinct differences between the values of our NATO allies and the values of the leaders of Russia. I'm not going to say the Russian people, because I believe the Russian people at their very essence are good people. But unfortunately, with a monster and an evil person like Putin in charge, they are being set down the wrong path.
And what is your impression about the Ukrainian military leaders? Because has this impression changed during the war? Mm-hmm. So what was your impression before and now?
Actually, I served at U.S. Army Europe between 2016 and 2019. Of course, this was after Russia illegally went into the Donbass region in Crimea. And because of my responsibilities at U.S. Army Europe, I did travel to Ukraine quite often to their training area in Yavrev. And what I saw there were very dedicated Ukrainian leaders at the battalion level and below. Very dedicated to defending their country, very dedicated to trying to protect their way of life and democracy and the values that I already talked about. And now here at this leadership symposium, I've met several Ukrainian general officers, and I see that same dedication. These Ukrainian general officers that are here have all served on the front lines. They've all put their life on the line, and they've all dedicated themselves to defending the way of life of the Ukrainian people. And I'm very proud to know our Ukrainian partners.
And talking about the NATO countries, the situation is changing. The war is being made in a different ways than before. So what military leaders do we need now? And what military leaders we will need in the future, having in mind, for example, artificial intelligence, which is already used in the battlefields?
Well, I think we're talking about a few different things. I think all leaders have to be technically competent and tactically competent. That's a given. And, you know, technology continues to change. And so leaders have to be adaptable and be willing to change as technology changes. So leaders have to make a commitment to learn. And leaders have to make a commitment for the organizations they lead to be learning organizations, which means, you know, taking the new technology that comes on hand, taking the lessons we learn from the battlefield, and then applying those lessons so we could be more successful on the battlefield. So I think really leaders have to be prepared to learn. Leaders have to be humble enough to accept the fact that they don't know everything, because things, especially in terms of technology, change so quickly that leaders have to look at themselves as always being in training, never thinking that they have all the answers.
Who is the most inspiring military leader of nowadays? And who is your favorite military leader, maybe from the history?
Yeah, you know, I've always respected Colin Powell. I think he was an outstanding leader. You know, just going back to, you know, farther back in American history, I really admired General Grant, who was a Union general during the Civil War. I admired President Lincoln. And I think we get to learn a lot from, say, President Abraham Lincoln in terms of the will he showed. You know, he had many setbacks during the Civil War, and he always had the optimism and the courage to keep moving forward and believing that he was going to be able to keep the Union intact. And he certainly did that because of his dedication. I think we learned that from what's going on in Ukraine. You know, this war is turning into a protracted war, not of Ukraine's choosing at all. It was Russia's choice to invade Ukraine. I think we just all, as NATO allies, have to understand that we've got to display the same type of will that the Ukrainian people are showing and continue to support them and not let them down.
The last question would be about the Lithuanian military leaders. Yes, you communicate a lot with Lithuanians.
Yes.
Maybe you can, what is your opinion about this event, leadership event, organized in Lithuania? Yeah,
thank you for asking that question. I've got a long history with Lithuania. I served in Lithuania for a year back in the year 2000, so that was 23 years ago. I lived in this country. I traveled all over this country visiting military units. And over the last 23 years, I've seen a lot of success and a lot of progress. As a matter of fact, one of the things I'm most proud of is Lithuania has a partnership with Pennsylvania, with the Pennsylvania National Guard. And I think it's remarkable that the Pennsylvania National Guard, soldiers and airmen, and the Lithuanian soldiers all served together in Afghanistan. I think that's remarkable. I think that was fantastic. And I will tell you, I wasn't part of any of those units. However, the stories I've heard about the courage and the dedication of the Lithuanian soldiers as they served in Afghanistan along with our Pennsylvanians and other U.S. military was just outstanding. And then you have some outstanding leaders here. You know, General Poshus, who used to be the chief of defense, he now serves in your parliament. General Rupchus I've known for a long time. General Leka, who is the commandant of the military academy, I've known for a very long time. They are outstanding leaders, and I think Lithuania could be very proud of those leaders. General Vakšnoras, who retired, who is still doing his part by being an advisor for the Ukrainians, for example. I think just doing a great job there. This leadership symposium that is being hosted by the Lithuanian Military Academy is an outstanding event. We had really good presenters yesterday talking about military leadership. We had our partners from Ukraine here, and of course Colonel Zybas from the Lithuanian Armed Forces. Of course, he's retired now, both presenting today, talking about the Soviet way of leading and the Russian way of leading, and really there hasn't been much changes since the Soviet Union collapsed and how Russia is leading today in a very brutal, tyrannical manner. And so I think the last 2 days of this symposium have been a great success. We've had many participants here. We've had a lot of questions from the audience. And I think the next 3 days are going to be very, very productive here.
So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for the interview.
It was a pleasure to talk with you and to participate in this event.
Yeah.
Yes, it's really great experience for me.
Thank you for all you do to get, I think, important messages out there to not only the people of Lithuania here within your country, but Lithuanians throughout the world. So thank you for what you do.